seen me talking about turning on the app. That's what happens every time.
We can't beat when I had to turn it on and I'm just like staring up at my top monitor and saying, okay, now we're going to wait a few minutes before we actually start. Literally word vomiting what's going through my brain.
Well, that's all this is, isn't it? See, that's how I feel. It's
That's
exactly
fair.
how I feel. I'm glad
That's
you
fair.
do too.
That's fair.
Yeah, like when we hit end recording, and then until the next morning when I listen to it again, I'm thinking of all, I'm like, what's all the word vomit I did in this episode? Which there's always a lot in my head. Thank goodness it's usually better than I hear it in my own head.
Yeah. It always is. Everyone's their own worst critic.
I hope so. DMs are open if you disagree. If you got something to say, I'm here for it. I'm doing that thing where I look at the stats to see if Miami stands out in any way, and they're kind of looking like a Colorado Rapids team early in the season.
It's hard. It will be hard to not, and maybe that's why I dug into the storyline of it all, because it's going to be hard not to just regurgitate the same things we said about Colorado and Toronto.
Yeah.
They're bad. Like, this is a legitimately, minus the LAFC roadblock, it's our easiest 4-game stretch that we're going to have all year. Like, LAFC pulling out a point would have been magnificent, but these other 3 games we're not going to have an easier 3 out of 4 games. Especially because of what could happen to Miami at the end of the year. Like, we are catching them at one of the most perfect times.
It really is. Right ahead of the deadline.
Right.
The messy deadline.
Right. Literally the day before the unveil.
When's their game after ours? It's a full week later, isn't it?
It's that 21st against Cruz Azul in Leagues Cup.
Aha.
Yeah, so they get a full week.
Jeez.
Or almost full week.
Oh, there we go. They stand out in PK saves. With 0.
With 0. Oh, so they stand out that way. I've got some stats that they stand out really poorly too.
Okay.
Well, that's all you today, I couldn't find a single. I thought you were talking about a single one where they were actually good.
No.
I got nothing on that.
All right, I'm going to hit record. You ready?
Okay, yeah, let's go.
Here we go. Take a chug here. See, it's a bad day when I drink before the show starts.
Let's go.
It's all right. It's just push. Recording. Welcome, everyone, to Flyover Footy. We are oh, my God, I'm starting over.
Yes. Ugh. We're off to a good start.
Yep. Here we go. Welcome, everyone, to Flyover Footy. We are brought to you on the... welcome, everyone, to Flyover Footy. You might be listening to us. They hate it when I say might.
They hate when you say might.
I'm going to redo was this 4th time?
4th time.
Welcome, everyone, to Flyover Footy. We're on the big 550 KTRS. Thank you for joining us, everybody. I got Matt Baker on the line here. Matt, how's it going, man? Save me from myself.
Phil, it's great. I mean, we're still in first place. We're 1 game away from Leagues Cup. The loss is behind us. We're looking forward. We're going to look back briefly, but we're looking forward. It's a great time to be a City fan. It's an exciting time to talk soccer. Like always, happy to be here with you tonight.
Happy to be with you as well. I've been off for a week or 2. You've been having to pull double duty as the host and the guy giving us all the facts around here, but it is good to be back, and thanks for assisting me on that one. We always start the show talking about the previous game, and in this case, I think we're going to dig into LAFC, especially since that happened last night as far as the day that we're recording for the podcast itself. And if you want to hear massive details, tune in for Flyover Fallout for previous games. This week, it's not going to go over LAFC per se or the game before it. I don't know how you guys structure it, but you guys do go into more detail about the previous games, and they come out on Monday. So do listen to that. But Matt, why don't you give us a couple of takes about what you thought about the game last night?
I mean, yeah, and if anybody's listening to us on the Big 550 KTRS, tune into our podcast for a little more expanded edition. We're going to go deep into some of the things we usually cover on Flyover Fallout. But, when you come away with a 3-0 loss, surface level, it's doom and gloom. Things are bad, and you don't really want to spend too much time dwell on things a lot. But there were some notable takeaways that could really carry forward. Worth noting, this was a very rotated match. First and foremost, I think everybody saw the starting 11. There were a lot of different takes on Facebook, on Twitter, just on social media about what is going on here. Are we completely punting this game? Some of the same takes you've seen in previous rotated matchups. The San Jose Earthquakes matchup comes to mind, where you've seen the Josh Arrow, Keel Watts, AZ, and Sam get their first start, and suddenly we pull out the win. So I see a rotated lineup that has John Bell getting his first start and first minutes in MLS, besides a 1-minute kind of sneak peek against Vancouver earlier this year. So our back line was completely new, as far as the 4-man back line has never been together. Johnny Nelson's back in the lineup, John Bell, Lucas Bartlett, center backs, and Jake Nerwinski back in at right back. And then we had kind of a 4-2-2-2, I think, going on, where you have Indiana Vasilev and Jabulu Blom as the dual 6. You had Celio Pompeu and Tomas Ostrak as the left and the right mids. And then you had Nico Gioacchini and Rasmus Alm up top. It was a return to the starting lineup for Alm. That was exciting to see. Return for Tomas Ostrak and Celio Pompeu. Very exciting to see. The one kind of interesting note that I had, though, on this lineup, they were all together for the first time. This was the 20th different lineup in 22 games. But outside of John Bell and Celio Pompeu, nobody had less than 9 starts going into this, which is kind of interesting given the overall depth and rotation that we've seen throughout the year. It's just the first time that this unit really had been put together. And honestly, Phil, I saw a lot of good come out of them from the first 60 plus minutes, really, until we started substituting. We had good pressing. We had gap closure by Gioacchini, Alm, Nelson, and Blom in particular. That's who I found noteworthy. Johnny Nelson had a really good game, from my opinion, on the left side. I thought he closed gaps appropriately. He pushed up when he needed to. Jabulu Blom was his usual cleaner, stopper self in the midfield. The City Twitter account and Facebook had a great highlight video to get today. Look it up. It has them just collapsing their midfield, blocking everything in sight, and just keeping the ball away from LAFC at all times. Nico Gioacchini and Rasmus Alm did some great jobs in initiating pressure. They were the ones who were forcing the everything on the press. They were forcing LAFC into some bad passes. They nearly had a few turnovers that led to goals, even though nothing really came of their shots. But it was really when the subs came on. It was the cohesion that was a lot different. And so when you take out John Bell, who Bradley Carnell said post-game, John Bell was never going to play the full 90. His style is very much more sprinter-oriented. So he closes space very quickly, and he's all out in that regard, not unlike Josh Yarrow, but to the umpteenth degree. And being his first start, Carnell knew that he wasn't going to come in. So I think Kyle Hebert was a prescribed sub. Unfortunately, Kyle Hebert had an off night, and there's no two ways to say that. There's an argument to be made that all 3 goals were at least in some way attributable to actions that Hebert took, directly or indirectly, whether it's going for a header at the same time as Lucas Bartlett, whether it's pressing too high up the field, too wide, and getting caught where Johnny Nelson ended up being on the inside of Hebert tracking back, or just in general getting bulldozed in the midfield in another transition goal. So all 3 of those transitions killed us, and the substitutes just didn't seem to have it in them to manage the game the way that our starters did. It was very reminiscent of Seattle in that regard, where we lasted 72 minutes here, and from then on, it was just falling apart in transition.
Yeah, and I want to kind of build on your thoughts there, because I think you were kind of leaning into this too, that, I think a lot of people were talking about that punting on the lineup thing, and I might have agreed about 4 or 5 months ago. But the fact that City's been playing without Lubin, without Klaus, and pulling out, wins despite that, with players, team players, the designated team style thing has been working without our designated players. And so now, I think there's a way that this team can play through this system that works. And, you look at this lineup, and someone maybe other teams, maybe other styles might think, yeah, this was a punt on a lineup just to get through this game and, play LAFC for real, perhaps in the playoffs and in the next game. Well, I disagree with that just because I do think Bradley Carnell has faith in everyone on this roster. He's said it before, and I know that sounds like coach speak, but I think he means it. Again, you look at the wins in the last few weeks, it looks like almost anyone in this team on this roster can be put into the lineup and put on a good show. And I think that happened against LAFC. Arguably our worst players based on minutes, based on, who has been playing throughout the year and starting throughout the year, was in for the first 60 minutes. And I think they, like you said, Matt, I think they did a good job controlling this game. And I almost thought that Bradley Carnell came into this game with a plan. Yes, we'll rotate. We'll get through the first 60 minutes, and then we're going to start playing players with fresh legs. We're going to attack LAFC higher up the pitch. We're going to throw in Leuven and start, seeing if that can pay off some dividends against LAFC. And perhaps, I don't know exactly what happened, but perhaps the pushing harder up the field lent to better transition play for LAFC, leaving us more vulnerable in the back. Maybe not. My other thought is that perhaps LAFC tried to go at us like they normally do, possessing the ball, trying to get through us, playing through the middle, playing through the wings, depending on the play. And they just decided they needed to adjust. They needed to, play the transition for the rest of the game. They looked like France from minute 60 on to the end of the game, and it worked really well for them because that style of play works well against St. Louis City, in my opinion. So, I don't fault Bradley Carnell. In fact, I think he came into this game with a nice plan, and it just backfired against a really, really good team, a really well-coached team on top of that, in my opinion, in this game. And I'm excited to see the rematch because I think it's going to be totally different than what we saw last night.
Yeah, and I'm excited to kind of dig into this one a little after we preview Miami for our podcast. But end of the day, this was a team that's at the top of the table for a reason, given all of their fixture congestion. And so they have the depth, just like we do, to say, okay, Bogu's isn't working out. We're going to put in Buick, and he's just going to run the table on us, scoring himself a goal. Denny Bouanga is just doing Denny Bouanga things. Jose Cifuentes is managing things from the midfield. All their pieces fell into place eventually. And I do think that we forced a little adaptation on their side, which is something that we do well when we have success in the first 60, 70 minutes, is we force teams to adapt, and the best teams adapt well. When we can continue dominating is when those adaptations don't work well. And we see that from some of the lower table teams, mid-table teams that aren't able to adjust to what we're throwing at them. LAFC, they leveraged quick transitions as opposed to transition and pulling back into possession. So they went more all out in their efforts on those individual moments. But it's not like they overly controlled every single aspect. Don't forget, they only had 3 shots on goal with their 3 goals. This wasn't a team that was peppering us at all chances. Berkey wasn't being threatened every single minute. 1 ball went off the crossbar. These were just very, very individual moments that they took advantage of, and they made us pay in those transitions where they had numbers, they had overloads, and they didn't stop when they saw an opening.
Yeah, I think if the team was to be faulted in the first half onto the 60th minute, I think it's offensively. I think that's where perhaps City did actually look bad, and I think they're in for a little bit of critique there. Did you have something on that?
No, that's one of the things we're going to touch on later on, but it's Edu Leuven's appearance and what he did in the game. There's too much to talk about right now, but there's a lot that it went into his positioning and what we saw from him, as well as Sam Adeniran and even AZ Jackson when he came in, and how they weren't able to be effective like we had seen Sam and AZ in the past few games. Some of them, I think, is just this as a microcosm of LAFC and what they have. And there are a certain few teams in MLS that are elite tier, no matter where you are in the season. And LAFC is one of those teams. And so this was a measuring stick in a way. And it's a good down to earth reality check in between these matches that we've had, where we face a Colorado Rapids, a Toronto FC, who are bottom of the table. And then we play LAFC and we get that reality check. And now we get an opportunity to go forward to the worst team in the East and Inter Miami, and understand that it's not just the powerhouse St. Louis City. It's we can be beat. We were just beat. Now we have to prove ourselves once again.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's a rough match, but it's not the end of the world. We're going to get into that more than once in this episode. But, I think we've been pretty positive about this 3-0 loss. The one bad thing I will say is that we've been pretty high on games when Blom starts and Alm plays. And I think this is the first one that kind of maybe, poked holes in that possible theory or correlation, perhaps. Yeah.
My stats took a hit on this one.
It wasn't just you. I saw a lot of people saying that. That's not at all a dig on you, but it's just something that occurs to me weekly as I watch that kind of happening. So, but there's a lot of news that happened this week. We're going to move on past this game and start talking about the next one. Matt, can you lead us into some player news, perhaps?
A little bit of good news, I think, at this point. So we saw Leuven returned against LAFC, and that's the big one that we've been waiting for. We knew that he was ahead of Joachim Nilsson, ahead of Klaus, and so to see Edu Leuven return against LAFC after missing 5 games where City did go 3-2-0 while he was out. We had a -1 goal differential, so we were able to put together some wins there, but there's no team that wouldn't want an Edu Leuven on their squad in the starting lineup right now. So to have him play the few minutes that he was able, 21 plus, that's just fantastic to see. And we look to see that growing. So a start isn't out of the question against Inter Miami, given that prescribed load that we expect him to have. So he could go a half. He could go 55 or 60. That'll be interesting to see how his body responds this week. So be on the lookout for Edu Leuven to get more time against Inter Miami. Unfortunately, though, Klaus, still no updates on return timetable. The 4 weeks has really dwindled. And so now we're looking at Leagues Cup and hoping that something positive comes after that, I think. Whereas Joachim Nilsson, we're still looking at those last comments from Lutz saying we'd likely see him after Leagues Cup, but the previous timetable also has expired to the point where he's progressed enough to travel to the team as they went to Toronto and LAFC, but he didn't make the game day roster in either. So it is not out of the realm of possibility that we could see him in the game day roster against Inter Miami, however outside chances are on that one, but we might look to him during Leagues Cup to see action. I think that would be an interesting time in that cup match, that cup tournament, to give Joachim Nilsson a few minutes and see how he can run out there in preparation for the back half of the MLS season.
Yeah, I hope that happens actually, because I just would like to get him a practice session and against good competition. So that would be kind of fun. But the other thing about that is it's really interesting when the team travels and trains an entire week in other cities. Like they don't come back home to train. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I was thinking like, I wonder what extra players they brought just to be able to train abroad that they know aren't going to play, but they had to bring them, or even like backups in case someone gets injured, they're ready to go. I don't know. It was an interesting thing that they got to deal with as far as travel like that.
Well, in this one, they had the benefit of running into City 2, who had just played LA Galaxy 2 this past weekend. And so you're having that ability to have maybe guys like Pedro or Isak Jensen who are at the ready in case something happens. And so it was nice to be able to have that flexibility, even though they didn't really need to utilize it.
Yeah, pretty cool.
And the other really big thing this week, Phil, is we've been trying to introduce a transfer window rumors section here in the show. And so we're not going to go too deep because nothing really happened this week as far as the rumor discussion. We talked last week about Conrado and Nuke V. Thorson, the rumors from the Brazilian and Icelandic players who are rumored to be in discussions with St. Louis City at various steps of negotiation. This week, it was the opposite. We're hearing rumors now that after the past few matches, AZL Jackson is garnering a lot of interest from teams in Europe. Manuel Veth has a great article on Transfermarkt about the just eyes that are being put on AZ Jackson at this point, knowing his age at 21, knowing all of the potential and talent that he's really been able to display. We're talking Villarreal from La Liga. We're talking Paderborn and Hanover from the 2 Bundesliga, and Bayer Leverkusen from Bundesliga showing interest in AZ Jackson. What St. Louis paid for him was pretty nominal, $150,000 transfer fee to Minnesota United. The big deal for him, though, is going to be Minnesota United gets a 20% sell-on fee for any outgoing transfer. So if you're watching the AZL transfer window rumors or outgoing discussions, be on the lookout for a high cost that St. Louis would be asking of him if they were to let him go at this point. Otherwise, let's hope to keep him on our roster for the rest of the season, at least.
Yeah, and I wonder if that sell-on fee becomes kind of a normal thing when they know that Lutz is at the end of that sell-on. Like there's a good chance this guy's going to be able to sell this guy for a bigger price than we would, and it
Yep.
makes sense for someone like Minnesota, who they're not that active on selling players out like I think St. Louis will be. So that's such a fun one to see at the beginnings of that. Um, Matt, should we move on to previewing the next game? It's a big one.
Let's do it. It is
It
a
is
big
and it
one.
isn't, right?
It is, and we'll tell you why it's a big one and tell you everything you need to know. So let's set the stage, Phil. St. Louis playing Inter Miami at home this week. St. Louis is still in first place in the West going into this with 38 points through 22 games, now holding a 12-8-2 record, 12 wins, 8 losses, 2 draws, with 40 goals scored and a plus 13 goal differential. St. Louis is still 7-3-1 at home. Last 3 from St. Louis had that 3-0 midweek loss against LAFC, but before that, the three-game win streak, 1-0 at Toronto, 2-0 at Colorado most recently. And then Inter Miami. There's a lot to be said about Inter Miami and what's about to happen to them, but most of that doesn't matter in the slightest in this matchup this weekend. The Inter Miami team that we're going to play is definitely 15th and last place in the East with 18 points through 21 games. They hold a 5-13-3 record with just 22 goals scored and a minus 11 goal differential, which is third worst in the league to our previous wins, Colorado and Toronto. Inter Miami holds a 1-8-1 away record. Both of their wins this year, really, Inter Miami, from their away record, we have to look to the beginning of the season in how they made some of that happen. Their last 3, their form in MLS matches have all been draws. Last weekend, a 2-2 draw at DC United, 2-2 draw at home against Columbus Crew before that, and a 1-1 draw at home against Austin FC. Their last win was May 13th against the New England Revolution. That was their third of a 3-game winning streak. Keep that May timeframe in mind. Miami has just 2 clean sheets this entire year. Their first 2 games on February 25th and March 4th, which are the fewest in the league for clean sheets. And in their last 3 road games, Miami has allowed a total of 9 goals with a minus 5 goal differential.
I'm really excited to get to what all that could lead to with all the stories coming on. But first, we have a bit about the player availability for us and for Miami.
If there's one thing you could look at for this Inter Miami team, aside from what's about to happen, aside from Messi and Busquets and any other rumored players that might be joining them, it is the bad luck that they've had in how they've constructed this roster in what I believe is anticipation for Lionel Messi. Gregor, Franco Negri, Jean Mota, and Corentin Jean are all out with at least 4 to 6 month injuries, if not full season injuries. These are massive contributors for them. Gregor with a Lisfranc, Frank, he's out at least 6 months from the middle of May. Franco Negri is out for the season with an ACL injury. Jean Mota with an LCL out at least 4 to 6 months from May 4th. Corentin Jean, ACL injury, out for the season. These guys are, if not the biggest pieces of the puzzle in how their attacks and defensive structures have been designed around, then they're massive pieces. Because especially looking at Mota and Gregor, those guys are the linchpins of their defense, and we're going to talk about their involvement in why Inter Miami has struggled so much this season. That's a huge loss, and that explains a little bit of what their issues are. And they're going to look to right the ship without a lot of those key pieces that their entire systems were structured around. And the one way that they're doing this that actually could impact the City matchup this weekend is new coach Tata Martino, who is coaching this weekend against St. Louis City in his debut ahead of Messi's debut or unveiling with the club the day after. So Tata Martino has been brought in to replace Phil Neville. He managed Messi and Sergio Busquets at Barca from 13-14 and Messi with Argentina from 14-16. Martino won MLS Cup, if anyone remembers, with Atlanta United back in 2018 before departing for the Mexican national team. So he has not only familiarity with the players that Inter Miami is about to bring on, but he has familiarity with MLS. And so this isn't just a guy who has European, South American influences and relationships. This is a guy with a lot of MLS credentials. And so having him join Inter Miami is the one thing that really gives me pause in saying I can't find any reason why St. Louis City shouldn't dominate this.
Yeah.
We know from experience, Phil, what a new coach bump can give a team.
Yeah, new coach bump. And, when that new coach is Tata Martino, then like it's even more so because, like you said, this guy just won the MLS Cup. I think it was his second year coaching. And I think it was Atlanta's second year of existence. I could be wrong about that.
I think
But
that's right.
the man knows how to win in MLS. I think the only, that has me, I'm getting jitters just thinking about it because I think he is going to start whipping Miami into shape. I think we're lucky that he hasn't had much time with them. And also, perhaps in our favor, is that he wasn't always good with Atlanta. And we've seen how much Atlanta has had a slide, leading up to about, 3 to 4 months ago. I think they're starting to get their feet back under them, but they have been really bad. And it's been mostly because of player, mismanagement as far as the general manager signing the wrong players and players not working out, having to sell guys to Europe too. That didn't help them, losing those players. Jose Martinez, being out for a long time. All those things combined. But Miami, like you said, Matt, and this will lead us to a lot of the ideas we're going to talk about today. They're hurting pretty badly for talent. So perhaps, as much of a wizard Tata can be in MLS, he doesn't have an amazing team to work with, at least not this week, right?
Yeah, and this week too, there's a lot of off the field stuff going on. Obviously, the Messi unveiling almost goes without saying, but we need to say it. We play Inter Miami on Saturday, and there's an unveiling event. It's called the Unveil. That's scheduled for Sunday at 7 p.m., which is the same time as the Gold Cup. It's likely to get halftime coverage for them. They're working out some kind of an arrangement, but along with that, Inter Miami is adding 3,000 stands to their Drive Pink Stadium, hoping to be done by July 21st, Messi's debut. All of this off the field stuff is going on around the club. And so the players, as much as they are going to try and put this aside or look at the here and now and not against Cruz Azul on the 21st, it's in their minds. That there's something about the excitement, the anticipation about what's to come. It's can they focus and can Tata really get them honed in on this match against City? Because so far, they haven't been able to stay honed in on anything. This team just doesn't score, Phil. Their leading goal scorer is Joseph Martinez with 6 goals. Nico Gioacchini has 8 goals, if that tells you anything about comparisons here. Their fellow forward and Ecuadorian young designated player, Leo Campana, has 4. So Martinez with 6, Campana with 4, 1 in his last 8 MLS matches. So these are guys who are not in great form as far as scoring goals, especially Campana. The only other player with more than 1 goal on their team is Robert Taylor, if that tells you anything about the rest of their team scoring. No idea. Couldn't tell you. Key players for Inter Miami are their designated player trio. So prior to the Messi deal, Miami already had their 3 designated players. They had Rodolfo Pizarro, they had Leo Campana, and they had Gregor. Mention that Gregor's out. He has nothing to do with this game. Leo Campana, we talked about his goal scoring ability, but Rodolfo Pizarro is the one who's been in the news, in the negative for Inter Miami because they're trying to move him. And this has just been, it's been one of those really unfortunate MLS stories where the writing is on the wall of what they need to do to fit Messi and Busquets into the roster with guys like Gregor and Leo Campana because they're both DPs. They're both staying on the team. One of them is going to be bought down, probably Gregor, trying to buy down Campana. We'll see if that works. Pizarro is the odd man out and has been for weeks, and he's known it. MLS allows you to move a player without their approval. We saw that happen with Atlanta and Toronto this week, and it's unfortunate the way this is played out, but as of today, we're recording this on a Thursday, it sounds like Rodolfo Pizarro has a deal in the works with AK Athens on a 2-year deal with an option for a third to be moved. It's not outside the realm of possibility that because that is supposedly done, we won't even see Pizarro in the lineup. And that's a big blow because even though he has no goals and just 1 assist, he's one of 2 players on their team with more than 20 key passes. He's a contributor in making their anemic offense happen when it can score goals. And so his not having him, along with the injuries that they've had, the focus being elsewhere, the only thing to me they have going for them is Tata Martino and anything he might be able to draw out of this squad. But there's just so much going on with them.
Yeah, something's going around with the whole team. It's interesting with Pizarro. I think I read that they agreed to buy out his contract. So
Mhm.
I'm really curious. The rule that you put out there, Matt, I didn't know that they're allowed to just kick a guy off once a season. That's interesting.
Yeah, so apparently the latest that I've heard is it's a termination of his contract. And
Oh,
so
okay.
every
Pardon me.
year a team is allowed to buy out one designated player and clear them off the books. This is apparently a mutual termination of the contract,
Hmm.
so they will still have that mechanism available, but it's just one of those wonky things that you don't ever want to have to go through with a player, and you don't want your own team to go through it, even in trying to build for something better. It's just dirty, and it's something I hope never actually comes to fruition with St. Louis. And if you're looking for a bright side of the frugal spending, the looking for the diamonds in the rough, it's probably not having to go through this with your players.
Yeah, I don't know if that's something we're going to have to worry about at all, but
Yeah.
really good stuff from you, Matt. I really enjoy all the deep dives that you gave us today, and that's what you can expect from us on the Big 550 KTRS. We're Flyover Footy, and we go deep. We get you the nerdy facts, and Matt is the head of that. And so, we don't say it enough, but KTRS really does have the best lineup of St. Louis City coverage. There's like, 4 or 5 shows, and every week you're getting tons of soccer content. Matt's on another show as well. And so, I hope you guys are keying into that. You can check out every replay of every show on their app. So go look in those places if you'd like to hear anything about St. Louis City. If you're just trying to catch up, that's probably the easiest and best place to do it. And, you're listening to 45 minutes of, basically an hour and 15-minute show or more sometimes, that is a podcast. So if you would like to hear even more, a little more laid back talk in our wind down portion at the end of our show that doesn't air on the radio, you can find Flyover Footy on anywhere you get your podcast. So please do that. Leave a review if you're up for it. We'd appreciate it. It does help us. But I think we got a few more storylines to hit, Matt, before we move on to playing style and whatever else we can fit in here.
Yeah, strengths and weaknesses are important to know for Inter Miami because we've talked about their anemic offense. We've talked about their defense kind of being a little suspect. But why is their defense in suspect, and what do they really have to offer? So, looking at their strengths, Inter Miami is strong at shooting from direct free kicks, creating long shot opportunities, creating chances through some individual high effort from Pizarro, from Joseph Martinez with his finishing ability. Don't forget what he was able to do with Atlanta. He's still roaming in their attacking third. They can protect a lead when they get it, and they're good at intercepting and stealing the ball. This might be related to kind of where they position themselves, but they're not good at finishing their scoring opportunities. They're not good at stopping opponents from creating high percentage chances and defending against some of those counterattacks and set pieces. They're very weak against aerial duels. And these are the 3 things: counterattacks, set pieces, aerial duels, that if St. Louis City needs to be strong in certain aspects, it's actually these 3 areas. The things that Inter Miami is the weakest in are the things that really drive the St. Louis City offense. And so that's a huge opportunity. And one of the keys to the game that I'll touch on in a little while is winning these aerial duels over Miami, enabling a lot of our transition offense by winning these 50-50s that get sent out by Berkey or Parker or Hebert. Those are how we can start a lot of our transition moments. But Inter Miami in general, the way that their season has unfolded, Phil, I think is worth kind of looking at because it tells the tale of where they are coming into this and why they are in the place that they are. So they had 2 Brazilians, Gregor and Jean Mota, anchoring their squad in the midfield. They brought them in with the intention of shoring up their midfield in anticipation of getting Messi, right? They've built their squad initially around a lack of a playmaker in which Messi can fill. And so building around this compact defending was very intentional. So heading into the year, no creative midfielder. They looked for Messi in this area, but they knew that their first way to get success was by disciplined defending. And when they didn't step too far forward in those first couple of games, they didn't get overexposed. They let some of those veteran midfielders like Gregor and Mota do some of the work. Miami's only sustained success this entire year has been with Gregor and Mota on the field. Their mixture of their defensive range and their capable ball progression. And those first 2 games of the season in which Miami scored 4 goals, they allowed 0. They were averaging 46% possession. They got 6 points out of those 2 games. That's the highlight of their season so far. According to FBref, which is one of my favorite resources of all time, Miami allows more goals per 90 than all but 4 teams in MLS at 1.48. 1.48 goals per 90. It bodes extremely well for a St. Louis City offense that has a penchant for 3, 4, 5 goal games. Miami's non-penalty expected goals per 90 is higher than any team in MLS. So not looking at the PKs they allow, they're just the worst defending team in expected goals. They give up so many high percentage shots. And then that's all of those defensive issues have been prevalent because of the lack of Gregor and Moda. So without them, their defense has fallen apart. Striking wise, their attacking numbers, Leo Campana, Joseph Martinez, they've been able to get some balls on net early, but without relying on some good service to score those goals, without the capable playmakers that Gregor Moda can bring. Those two only have a combined 8 goals and are averaging the lowest number of touches in the box in recorded MLS careers for both. These guys are not getting service from anywhere. So no matter how good Joseph Martinez or Campana are, if they can't get the ball in and they can't receive, because they're not going to play make themselves, they're just going to be those Klaus type players. If you think about what St. Louis City has, if they're not going to get service, they're not going to do anything, and they haven't been getting service. And so Miami's lack of central players has really hurt them more than anything else. And so there's this gaping hole of talent in their midfield, but there's also some real tactical issues facing the team right now. And so defensively, Inter Miami tries to be very proactive. They like to press high. They like to defend in a mid block, so they don't set up like a Minnesota or like a Seattle has a tendency to in a low block. They like to set up inside inside the middle of the field and then press when they need to. But they're not good at controlling space, starting the attacks after they move forward to win that. They're 8th in MLS right now in PPDA. I've been talking about this stat. It's my favorite stat. Been talking about it for weeks now, at least. So it just measures how many passes a team allows outside of their defensive third before they engage and they make a move. Inter Miami, like I said, 8th in MLS right now in that with 11.1. St. Louis City leads the league in that. So 8th is pretty high in how often Inter Miami likes to engage the ball outside of their defensive third. However, Miami is tied for last with New England for fewest shots created from that, with just 15. And New England's 19th in PPDA, so they're not a pressing team. But Miami having just 15 shots created from those high turnovers and only 1 goal scored this entire season shows me that they're not effective in doing that in the slightest bit. They have a tendency to leave huge gaps between players when they move up and try to press, and they leave themselves very exposed, very undermanned in the central midfield. That's a huge opportunity for St. Louis, because a lot of the times in the past few weeks, St. Louis has found success moving the ball through the midfield where you have Jabulu Blom finding AZ Jackson. Keep those 2 players in mind, because when you see stats like this, when you see progressions like Inter Miami in their midfield and their vulnerability in space, that's where St. Louis has a huge opportunity. Looking to Inter Miami's attack, Miami missing this main playmaker, missing this person who can deliver service, this Messi-like person that they're going to be getting is a massive problem. So I mentioned how Martinez and Campana haven't gotten that, but this is a team without Messi. And so they're not going to have that going into St. Louis. Huge issue for them. And regardless of whether they're playing out of a back 4, back 3, how they organize their defensive shape, Miami moves the ball at a very, very slow rate. We also like to talk on this show about directness up on the field, how quickly you're moving the ball vertically, and how many passes per sequence you actually have. Miami is, in moving the ball up the field, the second slowest speed in all of MLS. At 1.15 meters per second. So it's the second lowest, according to another one of our favorite tools, Opta. And the way that they move the ball horizontally is second most passes per sequence. And so this is a team that likes to press. They like to move the ball around. They like to control the ball, and they don't set up in a low block. There are opportunities galore for St. Louis to be feasting on some of what Inter Miami has to offer, because St. Louis is still the most direct. They still have the second fewest passes per sequence. The expected goals against from Miami in open play is the worst in all of MLS. They are expected to allow the most goals in MLS if you're looking at the stats. They have the worst expected goals in open play, so they're expected to not score in the run of play. The stats add up to an Inter Miami team that is so desperate for Messi and has been dealt such a bad card with their injuries that it explains to a T why they're in the position that they are so far, but why there is hope on the horizon. That hope just comes after St. Louis.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of dilemmas too, because, it's interesting to see what I think the biggest storyline here is going to be like Tata coming in, and what is he going to do with those stats that you just brought in? Because pressing, sure, I think Martino likes to press. I think that's something they're going to continue to utilize. controlling the ball and using a million passes to get a goal is not something that Atlanta did necessarily when Tata was in charge of them. But they did have Joseph Martinez. Pardon me, I said Jose earlier, but Joseph Martinez. But he was getting crosses from really quality players on the outside, and so man, I'm just so interested to see how Tata sets up in this one, whether they'll play faster. If they don't, I really do think, as I often say, against teams like this, St. Louis will feast on that kind of game plan. Even, no matter who's playing.
And I mentioned that they had a 48% possession their first couple matches where they were on top of the world. Since then, they've regressed down to 53% possession. They do like to dominate that possession.
Hold on. I love that you just said regress to 53% from 40-something. That's amazing. That just shows how long you've been a St. Louis fan here, but please do continue.
That's fair. Regressing, anything above 50% at this point is regression to me, especially when you fall into the form that Miami has. I don't like to, I've adopted and fallen so hard into the frenetic style of play. Get rid of the ball. I don't want it type. Yeah, I love it. But where can we look for Miami to actually move the ball? So Miami likes to dominate possession between the channels up to midfield. So those channels are basically the areas outside the 18-yard box to the left and to the right and in. So they dominate the possession between the channels up to midfield from their defensive end. And they continue to dominate the possession out on the wings. So they like to move the ball up and then they get the ball out wide, near the end line even. So they've got greater than 50% possession all the way down the wings in their attacking third. It's very abnormal for teams in the league. The only area that they really cede possession percentages is in their opponent's defensive third between the channels. So that opposite end from where they love to have the ball and move the ball out of. This is where you can expect Berkey, Parker, Hebert, Bartlett, whoever's in our back three there to start the progressions for St. Louis. I don't expect St. Louis to control possession beyond that portion of the field. So basically play to what Inter Miami has played to the entire season because they've been so ineffective at that game plan. And so if you can just control the ball in your own defensive third, have Parker, have Berkey really send the ball where it needs to go and then quickly move it. Don't hold the ball in any one space. Don't really control the ball or progress it individually up the field. Leverage your quick passes, take shots, win those aerial duels, and then move the ball up the field quickly. I wouldn't even mind if our game plan was to use AZ Jackson as the point man again to move the ball up and get Blom and AZ Jackson moving the ball up so that you might have some chances to create outside to an Alm or a Stroud in getting the ball sent in for service. But those key pieces and those key places in their central midfield that are so weak can be so well exposed by Jabulu Blom and AZ Jackson.
Yeah, I love that. I love that thought about, we know what AZ can do in space in the middle of the field and the fact that that's where they're at their most weak because of losses of injury. I love that idea. I think the other thing that you said that kind of appeals to me, we've been talking about in the last few weeks about who's going to be our, fullbacks going forward. We've had a lot of rotation in those positions lately, whereas, our mainstay Nerwinski, hasn't been playing. We've seen Akil Watts in those positions. Will Hebert play left back after Nelson? Like, I agreed what you said. I thought he had a really good game against LAFC, which I think is a nice change from the last few games that he's started. And so if Miami's trying to take the ball to the end line on the wings, what will our fullbacks look like in those situations? And will we be relying on Blom to run his butt off to the end line every single counterattack? Or, will our center backs be having forced out wide? Will Akil have to track back, which is something that he hasn't had to do quite as much as Nerwinski? All these thoughts come to mind, but it's good that we're thinking about this thanks to you bringing up that wrinkle in their tactics.
Yeah, and I just remember the last few games that Johnny Nelson started, there was a noticeable, and I think it was in the FC Dallas match, or Vancouver, one of the two, but it was noticeable in how much space he was allowing wingers to get really inside and deep. Down to the end line was very exposed on our left-hand side. And that's the thing that gives me a little pause with a guy like Johnny Nelson being on the field, whereas Kyle Hebert, I think, can defend well and defend well back in 1v1s.
Agree. Great. Well, we're getting to that point in the show where we should probably start our progressions. We kind of are leading into it by talking about what fullbacks are going to be playing in this game and what challenges they'll be viewing. But this is a big story. There was a highly rotated team against LAFC, and now we're looking at a Miami team that's not so good in comparison to LAFC. With the changes we've talked about, what on earth is this lineup going to be, Matt?
My biggest question is Edu Leuven. And not in what Leuven can bring, but how will Leuven be integrated with a lot of our more recent run of form players? Akil Watts, AZ Jackson, Sam Adeniran. I don't think Josh Yarrow is picked up for the starting 11 in this one. I think it goes back to Lucas Bartlett and Tim Parker. I wouldn't be surprised if Josh Yarrow does. I love Josh Yarrow on the field. His speed and his ability to play off of Tim Parker is really incredible. I love how Tim Parker can attack players 1v1, and then Josh Yarrow kind of drops back or to the side to pick up the space left behind. That to me has worked so well. So wouldn't mind to see Josh Yarrow in there. I could go either way on Bartlett or Yarrow. They both offer interesting things. But the thing in the midfield is where my really big key question is. I do have Hebert on the left. I do have Akil Watts on the right. But is Leuven going to slide in at the 10? Is he going to slide in a dual 6? Is he going to be a piece of the diamond on the wings? I don't know. And that's the biggest question that I couldn't get an answer out of Bradley Carnell after the game against LAFC. Maybe I asked it wrong, but I was trying to get at, he put Leuven in at the 10 when Indy Vassilev was in the game. And Indy Vassilev had such success before AZ Jackson at the 10. He was the guy who, after Klaus left, we found success with Indiana Vassilev at the 10. So is Carnell going to drop Indy back to the 6 again, and we're going to have a 4-2-3-1? I don't know. I think that my ideal lineup would have Kyle Hebert, Tim Parker, Lucas Bartlett or Josh Yarrow, and Akil Watts in the back line. Jabulu Blom, then Edu Leuven as more of that double pivot where you have Blom as a 6, Leuven as the box-to-box. And then we have a 3-man attacking mid of Jared Stroud, Indiana Vassilev, AZ Jackson, and Nico Gioacchini up top. I think that starting the game would give a lot of the versatility to the midfield that would allow us to move the ball up the field and progress it well, while still able to have Stroud and Vassilev defend on the wings to help out with Watts and Hebert in where Miami likes to move the ball. Having Blom progress to Leuven and AZ Jackson in the midfield would give us a whole lot of options and a whole lot of creativity up to Nico Gioacchini.
Yeah, all the questions you asked, you posed there are exactly the questions I've been wondering. I just know I'm not sure how the team will set up. I think we might be seeing a 4-2-3-1 if Leuven starts. And I do think Leuven starts, and then you start building the team around that. I agree with you. I think Watts is going to come in again. I think Hebert will be at left back. If I had to argue about center backs in this one, I agree. I love that Yarrow has been so good, but I think when you have a Joseph Martinez starting potentially, I think Bartlett might be a good teammate for that he can kind of tower over Joseph, who can be really sneaky about finding space at any given moment. And so, the center backs are going to have to be really careful. Trust Parker to the end of the world with that. But I'm curious what his center back partner will be. I think my big thing will be AZ Jackson. I think I'd like to see AZ at the 10. And so I'd rather see Leuven back there, and I'd like to see Blom in there as well. And so, I'm interested to see. I think Alm will start. I think Stroud will start based on the previous game. And, do we start Nico? I don't really care who starts between Nico and Sam. But
did you drop Indy?
Yeah, I think Indy is the one that I dropped in my mind. And so the rest, I think, will just fall into place. I won't have any qualms with anything, but I think we're done with rotated squad. I think we play the best 11 we got at this given moment, which is hard for Bradley right now, isn't it?
It's very hard, and it's very hard to identify because Indiana Vassilev has been in good form. He hasn't had poor games. He hasn't had noteworthy goal-scoring opportunities. He's taken some good free kicks, but we also haven't seen a lineup that's featured AZ Jackson at his peak that he's progressed into, along with an informed Edu Leuven. So how are those two going to play on the field with Jabulu Blom and whoever the other midfielder is? That's a huge unknown, and can their cohesion carry forward just like the previous ones did with Blom, Stroud, Indy, and AZ there in the diamond midfield?
Agree. Yeah, there's so many options, and I really look forward to seeing what Bradley picks. And I do think it's going to be a fun match, no matter how it goes down. A lot of question marks that are going to be answered in this game. So look forward to this one. We're all out of time for now, but like I said, if you want to listen to the podcast, we talk for another 30 minutes or so about whatever comes to mind, and we fill that time with no difficulty at all. So please join us there. Otherwise, we are Flyover Footy. You're listening on the big 550 KTRS. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll talk to you next time.
Go City.
Okay. Okay, so I will stop the stream this time.